Welcome to the Daily Build, where I share lessons from my experience as a business design facilitator and keynote speaker to help you bring more value and get better results in your work. So, facilitation and presenting, I want to break these down a little bit. How are they different? Because they are wildly different. We often think about workshops being led by a person at the front of the room with a marker in their hand leading a conversation. And in many ways that can be right, but in many ways it's not. So let's boil this down. Facilitation, the background of the word facilitate means to make easy. So when you're running a workshop for a client or for your team, for any reason, when you're gathering people around to meet an objective, you are there to make it easy for them to reach the designed objectives for the purposes of the workshop. Now, there's many levels of thought around, how much should you be involved, how much should you be leading in that conversation, and with facilitation, your role, again, to make easy, your role is to, using a facilitation axiom here, which is to tap into the genius that already exists in the room, right? So you're there to make sure everyone's included, to make sure that everything's on track, that everything's to time, and it's not always about you providing the answers to what it is people are trying to achieve with that workshop. So facilitating is very much you in a bit of a, not really a background role, but you're like in a shadow role in a way. You're there to essentially manage the energy in the room and make sure that it's directed in a way that's constantly going back to the benefits of the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. So that's facilitation. So a designed experience where for people are invited for a specific reason to meet outcomes. And here's another thing about facilitation is that you're not there to lead people to a specific destination. That's more instructing or teaching. Facilitation is more, you don't exactly know the answer. Maybe you have some inputs and some ideas to where you're going, for sure, but you're not trying to guide people to your expected outcome. That's not facilitation. That's not being neutral, and that's leading people. But as a proper facilitator, you're there, your mindset is always, this works so far as a percentage correct. And with your help and your expertise, you're going to help us get to the rest of the way. We don't exactly know what shape that's going to be in, but with our minds together, we're going to get there. And you're there to lead the process. So facilitation is, you're not there to drive the content. You've got to design a process. So you're there to drive the process, but the content really belongs to the outcome that you've all achieved together in a workshop. So that's facilitation. Presentation is a very different animal. And I'm also going to give some examples at the end of this video as to how they don't quite merge, right? Sometimes people will think if they're really strong presenters, they're going to be great facilitators and vice versa. They're different skill sets, and you can absolutely be great at both, but just know which role you're stepping into. So presenting it's essentially a one-way conversation where the value has been created before the presentation. So facilitation is being created during, and presenting, the value is created before. And as a keynote speaker, or you don't have to be a keynote speaker on a stage in front of a big audience. You'd be presenting to a boardroom or a meeting, or your turn to speak at the weekly all hands. Presenting is, you've prepared, like you've shown up, you've taken a partner with other people, you make sure that you understand the scope of the event, what good looks like from the event, what good looks like from you speaking at it, and you're designing backwards from that, and you are delivering on that agreed scope and outcome for that event. So you are very much in the lead as a presenter. Your energy on stage, you're there to I don't want to say like gain attention, but you're there to hold attention. Your job is to take people on a crafted journey to an outcome which you either want people to do one of three things as a presenter. You want people to think, feel, or do something differently because of the time that they just gave you for you to speak in front of them. That is your job as a presenter. So it's pre-designed. You are guiding them on a journey with stories, stats, info, whatever world and environment you're presenting in, that's presenting. So as I said before, so here's where they don't mix, and this comes from a personal story of mine. A good friend of mine, his name's Sanjay. He's an amazing facilitator, and we used to work together in Australia. And he went on to start his own facilitation business and brought me in for some consulting facilitation work. And I, at that time in my life, this was a few years ago, I'd been doing a lot of keynote speaking, more than I was doing facilitating. And I blended the two, and I shouldn't have. And he called me out on it. So I remember I was in front of the room, clients were there. It was a construction company in Australia, a very large construction company that was doing a merger. And I was leading, but I was using my presenter voice. I was behaving as if I'm working from a predefined script. I was being quite, I wouldn't say loud, but I was being quite animated. I was being very there and very present as a facilitator or as a presenter when I was supposed to be facilitating. And afterwards, he took me aside and said, "Were you presenting or facilitating?" I was like, "Oh, I was facilitating because it's a facilitation." He goes, "Were you presenting or facilitating?" I was like, "Ooh, yeah, maybe I was presenting." He's like, "Yeah." He goes, "There's a massive difference." And he wasn't just beating me around for it. He gave me a great tip. And he said, the reason when you're facilitating a workshop, this is super important. When you're facilitating a workshop, the reason you don't present, you use a very different mode. As I said, you're a little bit more in the background as a facilitator. He said, the reason you don't present is because you're going to come off as too authoritative, maybe to someone that people should listen to, people that should look to for guidance. And if you're facilitating, your job is to remain neutral. And if you're presenting when you're supposed to be facilitating, you don't come across as neutral. You come across as maybe a leader or a guide or a professional of a thing. And that invites your workshop participants to follow you, not to work with you. Very different outcomes. So facilitation, essentially you're there to manage a process and let them take the lead. Presenting, you're there to manage a journey that's going to have people think, feel, or do something different by the end of your talk. I hope you find this helpful.